From the Columbia University Language Resource Center, this is Said and Done, the podcast about languages and the people who speak them. This is Said and Done. I'm Chris Kaiser, and joining me is Joowon Suh, the coordinator of the Korean language program at Columbia University. In this conversation, we discuss the rise of Korean cultural products on the global stage. We talk about how cross-linguistic rhyming works in K-pop, the popularity of the boy band BTS, archetypes in the movie Parasite, and her experience of visiting Korea after living in the US for many years. Here's my conversation with Joowon Suh. Professor Joowon Suh, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Let us talk a little bit about Korean and also about your background. Where did you grow up?
I was born in and grew up in Seoul, South Korea. And I came to New York City to pursue my grad study in 1996. And so I went to Teachers College across from, the Columbia University. And toward the end of my doctorate, the study, I got a job at Princeton University. So I commuted from New York City to Princeton for 4.5 years. And I got so exhausted. So I moved to Princeton, New Jersey. And I lived there for about 9 years. Then I realized that I'm a very, very much like a city person. So I came back to New York City, Columbia University.
Okay, well, we're happy to have you back.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask you about your classes, your Korean classes. You're the director of the Korean language program here at Columbia. And I've noticed that there's really been a lot of interest in Korean, and there's been actually increasing enrollments in Korean language across the board, and I was wondering, who are your students and why are they taking Korean?
For now, recently, all these lower level students, the lower level classes students, like first year and second year students, I would say most, like 70% are like the American students. American means that non-heritage students. So I could see the difference. I'm seeing the difference compared to, like, I would say 10 years ago, like 10 or 12 years ago. Most of the students, like the majority of the students who are taking first year, second year, third year, and it doesn't matter which level. And there are a lot of heritage students. We do still have a lot of heritage students, but there are more non-heritage students in American English-speaking students or Asian American students. So I would say 70% in lower level, but upper level, it's still heritage students. It's just the majority of third, fourth, and fifth year.
The American students who take your classes, what drives them to take your classes?
That's kind of interesting. 10, 12 years ago, usually their reasons are very much personal. My best friend is Korean, and my girlfriend is Korean, my boyfriend is Korean. But now they have all different reasons. So still, personal reasons are one of the main, the most important reasons. But also some students are into computer games, and then they want to get a job at Samsung, or just to develop or like computer, the professional computer gamer. And even that, or some students are, especially Asian American students, they're really into Korean pop culture. So they into K-pop, K-dramas, all sorts of reasons. Or some students are just they wanna learn languages which are totally different than English. So it's much more varied now.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk is that I have noticed with great fascination the rise of Korean pop culture in an American context. A huge appreciation for Korean pop culture. And in fact, I was noticing this, and I thought, okay, let me, try to understand a little bit what this is about. So I got into listening to some K-pop, and at first I was like, I don't like this. This is weird. But the more I delved into it, the more I realized this is a whole world. And I wondered if we could talk a little bit about different aspects of the world of Korean pop culture and kind of understand the ways in which it is linked to the Korean language. So when did you first start to notice that Korean pop culture was coming to the US, and what were some of the precipitating events that you saw that caused this wave to start rolling in?
It's very fascinating, and also I'm very excited about it because it's almost directly related to what I do. I would say K-pop has been there. It's always there, but the status K-pop has changed, or state of Korean pop culture has changed. Even 10 or 12 years ago, I keep pointing that is a 10 or 12 years ago because at the time I started seeing the difference in my student population and also the enrollment and everything. And it's there, and then they were interested, but it's more about very particular kind of unique culture. There's a very few people are interested in. But
so it's kind of a niche
interest.
Yes. At that time.
Yes. But suddenly, I would say 5 or 6 years ago, also with the rise of BTS, and everybody, I hope that I'm thinking everybody knows who BTS is.
Well, we'll talk about it.
Okay, we'll talk about it. But like with the rise of BTS, it becomes more like a kind of cool thing to do rather than unique, very obscure cultural product. So which is, kind of interesting change because nobody can force that change. It just, I don't know how it happened, but it happened. So that's one part of it. And also, some people started with K-pop or K-drama, and then they kind of expand their interest in different culture. Like, for example, like food, because they watch people eating food in the dramas and it's like, what is that? And they want to try. And also even like they are interested in Korean traditional culture, but not in a traditional culture, but it's more fusion modified culture. And it's like, what is that? So it's expanding. I hope that it will last, but it might not last, but I'll take it.
I understand. Yeah. I can imagine that this would be a great thing because it's a motivation for students to learn the language, and it's also a source of study, things that students want to learn about. Have you found that?
Yeah. It's I'm always interested in like pop culture in general. Like that's how I learned English, and I loved the American pop. So it's always language involved, and that kind of motivates my students. Not everyone, but who's interested in Korean pop culture. So, for example, like Korean K-pop, Korean pop music, when we first studied out, they are using a lot of English words in their songs, but now there can be like it's much more developed. It's much more sophisticated. So the way they mix the English and Korean is just brilliant. So if you listen to K-pop and then if you don't know Korean, then you would think that why is that a rhyming and what does that mean? So they are interested in that, and as a linguist I'm very much interested in that. So it's a kind of I wouldn't go to really kind of like the scholarly about it, but it's an interesting translanguaging space. So it's you know English and Korean, why don't you mix it? That's your repertoire. So you can just use it as a one resource instead of like, I'm switching from English and Korean. So that's kind of an interesting development.
Why don't we focus in on K-pop? When do you first start to see early versions of K-pop?
Probably, I don't know if you know this group, but it's a late 1990s, Seo and boys. Everybody says that that's the start because it's a 3-man kind of semi hip hop dance group.
Okay.
And then they started rapping. So rap is a very, very new concept at the time. And then like all this younger generation, they were crazy about them.
Yeah.
So they started out, and then there is like other groups. I would say it's a late 1990s.
Okay. And you mentioned that at this time, these K-pop bands were using English, but in a way that was different from how K-pop bands are using English today. So how has that evolved over time?
I actually wrote I presented at a conference, it's a sociolinguistic symposium conference a long time ago in 2012 about this language mixing in K-pop. At the time, it was more very kind of like, I would say simplified, but they are playing with a lot of puns. Like, for example, if you know Korean, probably who's out there, they understand what I'm saying. But like we say 걸 is like a thing with the object particle. But then 걸 sounds very similar to girl. So whenever they read the lyrics, but it's definitely 걸 in Korean, but they pronounce it as a girl. But at the same time, if you really listen to it, then it can make sounds, it makes sense. So it can be a girl. So they play with the pronunciation, and also they are using a lot of English expressions like, oh, come on, and that kind of thing. It's just mixed in the lyrics. But now, more sophisticated way, they are trying to do rhyme, and also not just they are trying to do rhyme at the end. They are in between the sentences. They are mixing them up, and then some words are just the English words, but they change it into noun modifying form in Korean, which is kind of a very major grammar structure. So that's how they do it. Like, for example, cool. Then cool is a very, the most commonly used, the English word in Korea, but cool han. There's a han is a noun modifying form. So English word, noun modifying form, and they become some kind of a noun modifying adjective.
What would cool han mean?
Cool itself is like, oh, he's cool.
Yeah.
But now cool han person, cool han girl, then it's like girl who's cool.
Okay.
So that kind of play with it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. One example can be that. Very simple example. So they are using English word in the Korean grammar structure or Korean word in English grammar structure in their lyrics. And also when you want to say something very sexual or something very vulgar, they use English.
Okay.
Sorry,
yeah.
English speaking people, but that's how Korean people think about English. So they can be that way when they use English. So then the sexual part, they use an English word. But it's changing. Now they are using Korean with the English, and then they are mixing things up, and they are making a little bit more kind of risque kind of expressions.
So in a way, you can do things or say things in English that you could not as easily say in Korean. That's why you're pulling it into the... Is that right?
Yes. So we used to do that much more, but now they are a little bit more daring. So they are using Korean word and English, and then they mix things up. But still, English is used that way, or like, and also in Korean, we don't use pronouns that much. Like, for example, first person pronoun we are using is na, that's I. But in Korean, if you use a lot of personal pronouns, especially first person pronoun, you sound very selfish, self-centered. But in K-pop, if they want to say I, they don't want to use Korean na, they use I. So it's like, okay, in English, you got to use a subject. You got to use a pronoun. You got to say pronoun. But in Korean, we can omit it. So if you keep saying the personal pronoun, then you sound like, just the very non-Korean-like. So they're doing it. So
right. So the I in English is weaker in a way, in the sense that you have to have it.
Yeah.
So you kind of get around this very strong personal pronoun in Korean, which you use only if you're really like calling
Yes,
attention
yes.
to the
If you talk,
I-ness
yes,
of it. Yeah.
exactly. If you talk about yourself, but you cannot really keep saying na, na, na in
Yeah.
Korean. So you switch to I, then it's English, it's okay. So you
Right.
can keep talking, and still you're talking about yourself. But in English, it says you sound less self-centered or, but you're
Gotcha.
still talking about the same thing.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned rhymes. Can you talk a little bit about how that works? Is it that English words are rhyming with Korean words and vice versa? Or how does the rhyming work?
Yeah. So like in the older K-pop songs, the easiest way to do it is yo. Because you in the Korean language is 안녕하세요. So you, that's the ending for certain words. Like if you say I eat, 먹어요. If you say I go, 가요. So it's a yo, 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 yo.
Right.
So
Korean always has the word yo coming up.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So that they usually, very primitive way. It's a Korean yo and then English yo or something.
Yeah.
They very, very kind of old-fashioned way of doing rhyming. But now, for example, like crazy, then it's a 그렇지, then G is a Korean. So they kind of rhyming that way. So, but it's a crazy Z. We don't have that sound, but we have G. So they kind of like rhyming with the Z and G. But to Korean people's ears, sounds the same.
Uh-huh. Oh, wow. Okay, so this is something I wanted to get into, and it's a perfect way to get into it. There are really two categorically separate audiences for K-pop music. One is the audience that is Korean speaking that understands the lyrics, and the other is a global audience that may not understand the Korean or the nuances of it. They might look up the meaning of it, but they don't understand it just by listening. And these are two very different groups, and yet K-pop appeals to both groups, but maybe in different ways. So can you talk about this phenomenon, this bifurcation of the audience? And it seems to me that the rhyme strategy that you've described helps to hook a non-Korean speaking audiences because it pulls your attention into the song that if the song was just 100% in Korean might not happen. So can you talk about this audience phenomenon?
If you don't know the Korean language and if you start listening to K-pop, as you said, you probably think that, okay, this is an English word and this is some kind of a Korean word, but that rhymes with the English word. Interesting. But if you're really into it, you really want to figure that out and you start like learning Korean. But the K-pop, I think it's a visual part is very strong. So like, for example, American pop music, they produce music videos and everything. But K-pop, it's beyond that. The Korean K-pop industry, they invest a lot of money in producing music videos. I think that's music video part, the visual, the fashion, the makeup. But they can see the same visual and they are hooked into it. Like a lot of people say it's a package of sound, visual, and also for me, linguistically fascinating.
Yeah,
So
because it's also a linguistic package. You have this coexistence of two different languages that are relating to each other in an interesting way. I think you're right. My favorite BTS song is called Singularity.
oh,
And
the V.
Yeah, exactly. And really, just listening to it, I like to listen to it. It's the kind of music that I like. It's a neo soul. But when you watch the video, the video, in my opinion, conveys the meaning of the song.
Yes.
The meaning that's in the lyrics is also represented in the video.
Yes.
So it's a kind of supplement, a visual
Yes.
supplement.
Yeah. And also the very strategically write English lyrics for a chorus so that everybody can sing along. Or like the very keyword is in English so everybody can say that. But as you said, the visual part is like, as you can see, if you watch the music video, then you know what that means, the lyrics. So that's always a kind of compliment.
So can we talk about BTS a little bit?
Sure.
Within American culture, I would say that BTS is the most widely known K-pop group. And what I've appreciated about them is that they're really doing, it seems, quite a bit of, I don't know what's called, like cosmopoesis or world building. And so can you just talk about BTS a little bit, like what they are, what they represent to you, what they represent in Korea and what they represent in the United States? And do you agree that they're really the most prominent representative of K-pop?
They are the most successful K-pop artists in the American market, for sure. I don't know how they did it. A lot of people are analyzing it's because they use social media really well and they promote themselves in a kind of very clever way or in a sincere way. If you're their fan and they think that they are genuine, sincere, whatever the reasons, they are very successful. I didn't know about them that well until I came to Colombia. I think I told you before, but it was just in my 2018 spring semester, in my first year Korean class, there were like 12 students and 10 of them is just BTS fan. Okay. And they, whatever I say and whatever the examples in the textbook, they somehow related that sentence with BTS song or episode or whatever they watch on YouTube. I didn't know about them, so I studied BTS. First of all, I couldn't distinguish them, 7 of them. So I studied them in summer. I watched all these YouTube videos and everything, and I got into it. And then YouTube algorithm takes me to another one. Then now I know everything about them. Easily, I can say that. But their phenomenon kind of elicits a lot of academic interest. Yeah. So I am actually presenting a paper and is part of a panel in July next month in Korea. That's the 3rd installment of BTS and interdisciplinary studies. So I went to the first one right before the pandemic hit. That was my last overseas trip. So that was held in London. So I went there and I was very, very impressed. It's just not about language. And I was on a language panel, but it's about business side of it. Or some people are looking at the visual side of it. And also some people are fandom studies, gender studies, and also cultural studies. And all sorts of interdisciplinary panels were there. So people can say, oh, it's just pop culture, but why are they successful? And something about them clicks with some people. And that's what all these conferences are trying to figure out. It was interesting that one pop group, one K-pop group, makes some academic people organize academic conferences 3 times. So which is pretty impressive.
What are you going to present on at this conference?
I am presenting a paper about reaction videos to BTS. I got into reaction video because I am thinking, okay, I watch a lot of BTS music videos, and there are a lot of shows and live performances, and I realized that some people are watching it and then they're commenting on it. So I started watching them, and it was just to me linguistically very interesting because which part they're commenting on and how do they do it. And also interesting part is there is another layer. There are comments, YouTube comments on their commenting on BTS content. So it's kind of multi-layered kind of interaction, but nobody meets. They are just doing online. So it's not that's kind of interesting. So I am part of that. I'm presenting that paper, but I'm on the panel, and the other papers are one, she's an English language professor and in Korea, and she's presenting BTS's English. Their English is not that good, but somehow they communicate with their fans. So she's looking at it as translanguaging, how they understand each other, how they communicate with each other. And the other paper was about their lyrics, in the same thing as English and Korean, switching and mixing. And the other one is BTS is promoting Seoul traditional culture in the promotion videos. And then she's looking at as like what kind of language they're using and what kind of subtitle they're using it. So that kind of stuff. So it's all about language.
So there's really a lot there and a lot to kind of parse out. I'm really interested in the reaction video project. So a reaction video is a person who films themselves either listening to or watching a BTS video and the reaction that they have. And what is it usually that a person is seeing it for the first time, or How
Yes,
how does it work?
it's supposed to be. If they don't, if it is not their first time, a lot of reactioners, they say it's not my first time, so they are saying it. But most of them, I want to believe that it's their first time, because you can tell if it is not
Yeah.
the first time, and they already know what's coming up. Like nowadays, everybody's reacting to everything on YouTube. I don't know why. It's unboxing.
Yeah,
So
unboxing.
yeah.
Unboxing
You
videos.
got something from Amazon and you say like, oh, I am unboxing it. And
Yeah.
I watch it. I don't know why. I watch it and it's like, oh, what's in there? But this is like unboxing BTS CD or like the album, but it's a music video, or also their speech and their live performances. So which part they are commenting on has something to do with how they present themselves. It's like a reactioner's identity too. So there are a lot of layers, but I'm more interested in how they present themselves. Like,
Yeah.
for example, some African American reactioners, or like kind of saying, okay, they are hip hop group, all right. So they are kind of legitimate ties the BTS is hip hopness. And also I'm kind of interested in this is not really a academic part, but I'm interested in, I don't know why I'm watching reaction videos. Then I realized that maybe I want to be kind of validated by them. There's like, I'm not the only one who likes them, and then they are liking them too, and oh, they like the part I like. So it's almost like a watching it together kind of impact. So a lot of reasons, but linguistically a lot of things are going on, so I am very interested. But at the same time, we gotta understand they are making money.
Right.
So if they react to BTS, a lot of viewing numbers, because a lot of BTS fans are, including myself, watch it. Some people think that it's not really completely pure, their intentions are, but I don't care. It's well, whatever the reasons. But the identity part, the way they present themselves, even with their channel, name of the channel, it's like the name of the reaction videos, like for metalheads reacting to BTS for the first time. They're like all this long hair with the tattoos and very manly men, or like Australian guys, two Australian guys, or some dance crew reacting to BTS. So some of the titles already, they present themselves as a certain identity vis-a-vis BTS.
An identity that might not necessarily like BTS. It turns out that they do like them. And so there's a kind of element of surprise that, of course, generates clicks. People want to see that.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. And then what about in the comments? What do you see there?
So if the reactioners are relatively new to BTS, and the most comments are kind of like chastising them because they don't distinguish the members. I said, oh, that's a Suga. I said, no. And how many times I have to tell you that that's not Suga? That kind of thing. So it's a kind of chastising part. Or like some reactioners, they are claiming that I don't know much about them, but I'm getting to know them. So bear with us, because they are so worried about the comments, the very nasty comments from their fans. But when they do, a lot of comments are about certain parts. They recommend next music videos, next thing I want you to react to. So that's a recommendation. And also they are like basically watching the content together. It's like, yeah, right, I like that part too, that kind of thing. Or certain linguistically interesting, some comments are correcting the reactioners' pronunciation of the BTS members' names, or title of the songs, or the lyrics. So they are kind of correcting them. Okay, no, that's not how you pronounce them. There's some reactioners, if they want to prove that they are a big fan of BTS, they usually use their Korean names, not their stage names. So it's like, okay, I know their Korean names too, and in a Korean name way, not just the last name last, because we use a last name first and the first name, the next one. So that's how they do it. That's also, to me, it's more like an identity construction.
So there's a kind of circulation of identities in this ecosystem.
Yeah.
Really. So we've talked about K-pop and BTS specifically, but I was wondering if we could get a little more general and talk about the rise of these Korean cultural products that have been appearing within US culture in the last few years. Not just K-pop, but also K-dramas, Korean food, Squid Game on Netflix, Parasite, the movie, and so on. What do you feel explains this new phenomenon of Koreanness in the US?
Of course, K-pop was probably the most prominent thing, but and also K-drama, but it's because of Netflix now it reaches a wider audience. Interestingly, it all happens at the same time. I'm not sure suddenly the Korean movies and music become really, really good, or they just kind of like out of a wider audience, global audience is more paying more attention to it. So now they started finding out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, Parasite won the Oscar and it's like, oh, suddenly Korean movies. So Korean movies are always there. And then I'm not saying that Parasite was not a wonderful movie, but it's not the best movie of that director.
Yeah.
But suddenly people pay attention to it. It's kind of interesting. So I think it's about timing in a sense. And then people say it's a momentum. So
yeah, it's like a critical mass. There's a critical mass of people who are interested. It creates an opening. It's like, okay, what can we do with this possibility?
Yeah, it kind of spills over even to fashion. It's all this high-end fashion. It's all European. And then suddenly some actresses are wearing Korean designer fashion and it becomes a cool thing. Not to the global audience, but to Korean people. Because Korean people always think that, okay, Korean fashion, then now she's wearing it over the European high-end brand. So it's a cool thing. So that's a kind of a lot of interaction between the products and the types of the products.
Yeah, I haven't really noticed. So I'm not a great fashion person. So what is notable about Korean fashion? What's, how do you identify it?
Yeah, well, for example, Blackpink, another K-pop group, and then the BTS, they are wearing modified version of Korean traditional costume, hanbok. They are modifying it a great deal, but they were showing that this is a Korean traditional costume. So that's a kind of a fusion, like a modernized version of Korean traditional culture. When I was in college a long time ago, when we talk about, Korean fashion designers, and it was like, oh, I don't want that. I want this European fashion designer. They still do. But at the same time, now it's like all these young fashion designers, they are like, they want to be different and they want to incorporate more Koreanness into their fashion. And then young generation start liking it. So I think that's a part of the Korean pop culture becomes a little bit like, come across as a cool thing.
Yeah.
Not just to global audience, but to Korean audience. So now a lot of Korean younger generation, they want to, find out about older kind of materials and they try to modify it a little bit. That's interesting.
It seems like there are, how can I put it? There's this large storehouse of Korean cultural products, but it seems like there are specific instances that kind of cross the threshold into American culture. I think that BTS is one of them. I think that definitely Parasite was one of them. Why do you think that Parasite was well received and so popular in the US? Is there anything about it that, even though you said it's not the director is necessarily his best,
in my opinion,
in your opinion, in your personal opinion,
in my very personal opinion, yeah.
So what was it that made that interesting to people?
Well, a lot of people think that it's the theme of the movie. It's the rich and the poor, but in at the same time, nobody is innocent and nobody's completely nice. The poor people are not nice in the movie and the rich people are not nice in the movie. So it's a kind of the murkiness of the, between the rich and the poor, kind of a dichotomy part. So that's interesting. Also, very visually pleasing, that movie. It's you can see that rich people live in this beautiful house. Actually, the director built, and then poor people living under the basement and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So that probably clicks with just the global audience because everybody knows the rich and the poor. Squid Game is the same. You don't have to understand everything because you don't really have to understand Korean culture because it's all about games. And you know that you don't want to die. And at the same time, you know that you might risk dying for that amount of money. So that's kind of a general theme about capitalism and the gap between the rich and the poor. But I'm not disillusioned saying that, Korean pop culture is going to be the mainstream culture in America, especially because American culture itself is a huge thing. But at the same time, with this, it's an opening.
I agree. And one observation that I have is that South Korean culture is like the US culture. It's a capitalistic society. It's a consumer society. And so there are resonances and recognitions and affinities between these two cultures. But there's also differences. So if you're an American and you listen to K-pop or watch a K-drama, you see a culture that in some ways echoes what you know, but in other ways is radically different. And that's very interesting. So with Parasite, when I watched that film, it reminded me very much of a story. So I studied Italian literature. It reminded me so much of a story from Boccaccio's Decameron. The Decameron is all about regular people who get into incidents and traps, and they have to use their ingenuity to solve a problem. Parasite is so much like a Boccaccio tale. You have this poor family. They're trying to figure out how to improve their situation, and so they use their wits to pull one over on these rich people. But as the plot unfolds, there's all these twists and turns and reversals of fortune that they have to then undo. So in some ways, it's a very recognizable tale to a Western audience and a tale that captures the attention as well. And so that's why I think that Parasite was able to so easily come through the American cultural filter that normally keeps things out, just because it's a tale in the classic style.
Probably the director, he wrote the script and everything. He probably knows how to use any kind of archetype. Archetypal criticism. It's like there is always a Cinderella story in every culture. And so it's a
tale built on archetypes,
yes,
I think.
Yeah. So that even if you don't understand the language, you understand.
Right.
So, yeah.
But as a Korean watching Parasite, do you see these archetypes in play, or there are different archetypes that you're noticing?
It's a huge issue in Korean society because it's a very small society compared to American society. And we are very kind of like, we all live in a very dense kind of area. So you know what the other person is doing. Even if you are very poor, you can see rich people easily, and then they kind of envy them. So it's there. So it works for Korean people because, all this basement is if you walk a little bit, then you will see all these beautiful houses in Seoul. It's right next to each other. So in America, it's a huge country. So if you don't go to that area, you wouldn't know. But in Korea, you cannot miss it. So probably that's why Korean people like that, the movie, and also Korean people love that twist. And it just...
well, we won't spoil the twist for anybody who's not seen it. It's true. In the US, the wealthy are physically removed from the poor. They don't see each other very much. But I guess in Korea, it's a small country. You do see these groups see each other.
Yeah, and also pop culture is very prevalent, like TV shows. Here, some people don't watch TV shows, but in Korea, it's a huge thing. So if you watch certain dramas, then you say, oh, rich people live like that, and they are indirectly kind of experienced. So it's they have the ideas. So it's just a closer knit society in a sense. So that's how Parasite was impacting the Korean audience. But I'm not a really sociologist or a culture critic. It's just from my point of view, from my end as a Korean language teacher.
Yeah.
Another thing is I left Korea like 20 something years ago. So probably my point of view is not really the Korean people's point of view. I'm a kind of like in between American, but I'm not a Korean American. I'm still a South Korean citizen. So it's my position is kind of like in between Korea and the US.
So when you go to Korea and you interact with people, how do you feel? Do people treat you differently than they might have treated you when you were living there full time?
Yeah, well,
Can you talk about that?
Yes. Now I am going back to Korea in July. In July after 3 years, because the last time I went there was like 2019. And probably I'll be culture shocked. Not because of I don't understand the language or the culture itself, but it's just the city itself is probably I wouldn't be able to recognize some parts and that kind of stuff. But yes, sometimes this is just the episode I tell everyone because I was so shocked. I got into a cab and then I started speaking Korean, and then the cab driver saying, so I guess you're not from here. I said, what? And then he said also, you're not living in Korea. I said, why made you say that? Because and then he like, my Korean is a little different. And he said, no, your Korean is perfect. But he said, because I got into a cab and I said, hello, how are you? That's what I said in Korean. And then he said, nobody does that. And I was like, nobody does that? And then it's a more Americanized, and he thinks that when I get in, 안녕하세요, that's the only thing that he said, she's not from Korea. That happened like already 15 years ago, and I was like, oh no. So that's a kind of a reversal culture shock.
You've picked up some habits.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
When you're in Korea and you tell people why you're there, that you live in the US, what is their reaction to that?
Their reaction, because I always usually see my friends and my family members, so they know I lived in the States for a long time. But people cannot understand why I lived in New York for such a long time and didn't want to come back to Korea. But I wanted to go back to Korea, but it just happened here. It just, just happened. So that part, and also even in academia here in Korea, the way it's not just Korea, it's Japan and China, in Asian society, it's much more formal. The interactions between professors are very, very formal.
Right.
Not like here. Like we don't definitely call each other by our first names. No, we don't do that. And also, we shake hands. And if you go to a conference, then you are being led into a VIP lounge, and instead of going into the sessions, so that kind of thing. So, but they are okay. I mean, nowadays a lot of Korean students who are studying at the Columbia, they all want to go back to Korea. 10 years ago, it was not like that. 10 years ago, they came here to stay here. Like I kind of did, like even if I, that was not the whole point of the coming here. But now a lot of people want to go back.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's I want to believe that Korea is a now better place to live in for younger generation. It's much more fun. Yes. So that's probably one of the reasons. Yeah. So
what's fun about it?
I guess it's just the interacting with the people here. Even in New York, if you don't go out with your colleagues, no, you don't. You do maybe
once in a while, but not in a serious way.
No.
Yeah.
But there, you do that,
Ah.
and you have more friends who would like to do that. And also, like, 10, 15 years ago, certain things you couldn't buy in Korea, but now you can buy anything, everything. So it's a consumer part, it's a market is much bigger now. So all those things, and it's kind of related to the same thing. it's becoming a cool thing
Yeah, right.
too.
So there's a sense of excitement.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
You know, when I look at Korean cultural products, the world that's depicted, you know, there are different versions of that world that's depicted. But sometimes I think about how it seems like images of Seoul, for example, you see like infrastructure that is up to date and modern. And then, you know, I come to work, I go across this bridge that's about to fall down, and I'm like, oh, I wish I were in Seoul right now. So I see what you mean.
It's like 5G country.
Yeah,
5G
exactly.
everywhere.
Exactly.
And everybody has a, cell phone with the 5G. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well.
Okay. So I am finishing everything on a positive note.
There we go.
Okay.
So Professor Joowon Suh, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.